started? Well, as you can see, I'm on the couch this time. I'm spinning The Wall, Pink Floyd's most ambitious project. It's epic, it's emotional, it's a double album, and it completely destroyed Pink Floyd as we'd come to know them. Ever since I did my reaction video to the Nostalgia Critics review, I've been meaning to give my own 2 cents on this record. And while I did react negatively to some of his weird comments, that doesn't change the fact that I do harbor my own criticisms about The Wall. I do think it's a genius concept, one that I myself have related to in recent years, and some of their most well-loved tracks can be heard on this album. But I do find there are long stretches of this album that I don't connect with as much as I do with some of their previous albums, and the cracks in the band's camaraderie can be heard between the grooves. Also, while Metal, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and Animals were conceived to be albums, The Wall was also envisioned to be a stage show and movie.
I knew that this was going to be a record, 3 or 4 cities, and a movie.
So I feel the piece in and of itself is meant to be experienced live, much like some of their earlier material I mentioned.
In fact, the album starts off in a live show, and then it flashes back and traces a story.
I actually saw the film before I listened to the album by itself, so any of my own interpretations that I would have formulated on my first listen might have been spoiled by what was already present on the screen at the time. I'll save my review of the live show and movie for later. We're just going to tackle the album for now and judge it on its own accord. When we did History of Rock the 1970s, Emily Seibert spoke about her love for the album.
I love The Wall so much. It was basically the only thing I listened to in college.
But since she's currently on America's Most Wanted list, I should probably find someone else to chat with about this album. I wonder who I could talk to.
So yeah, thought ya might like to review The Wall.
No, we are not doing a musical parody of The Wall.
Oh, come on! I had all these titles prepared and everything. Like, I got Another Pickle in the Wall, Comfortably Plumb, Hey Food. That one just writes itself.
Do you want to have a mob of angry Pink Floyd fans chasing you across the internet?
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time, but... Alright, well, I guess we'll just listen to the album and give our honest thoughts.
Well, before we do that, we have a lot of history to go through, so get comfortable. This is going to take a while.
In that case, I'm gonna grab some goldfish.
The story of The Wall begins with the Animals Tour, or In the Flesh Tour, their biggest spectacle yet, featuring the famous flying pig, fireworks shooting over the audience's head, and a very angry Roger Waters fronting the band.
I became rather disenchanted with it. You know, what was gained from having a large congregation of people, you know, communing together, which is what a stadium at its best is.
I mentioned before that after Dark Side of the Moon's release, Pink Floyd's audiences started changing. Gone were the days when they attracted this artsy crowd that sat quietly and enjoyed the music. Now they were on the same popularity plane as Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones playing stadiums, so the audiences were rowdier, they got drunk, and sometimes shot off fireworks of their own, much to Roger Waters' frustration.
Oh, for fuck's sake, stop letting off fireworks and shouting and screaming. I'm trying to sing a song.
Oh yeah, didn't Roger Waters end up spitting on a fan in Montreal?
He did.
Why did you spit on a member of the audience?
Because he was climbing up the front of the fucking stage!
That's a good reason. It was during their final show of the tour in Montreal after dealing with a hostile crowd all night. And it wasn't just Roger who hated it. Even David Gilmour refused to go back on stage for an encore, feeling they had played a bad gig.
And in that moment, a vision came to Roger Waters about creating a wall between him and the audience. When he mentioned this to producer Bob Ezrin, he replied saying, "Why don't you actually build a wall on stage?"
And it would take on the form of rock musical theater.
Did somebody say musical theater?
Were you just waiting behind the couch on the off chance somebody said musical theater?
Maybe.
While Roger explored the idea for the wall, he drew on past trauma such as the death of his father, the psychological abuse he suffered from teachers, Syd Barrett's breakdown, his divorce, and his own mental isolation from all things rock-related. I have to say, this is a pretty brilliant idea. These specific instances of trauma being bricks in a wall that we build around ourselves so we don't have to feel any more pain or have any contact with the outside world anymore.
That's right. It's a form of madness that echoes, you see what I did there? Back to Dark Side of the Moon.
And approaching this as a rock opera like Tommy, this could end up being Pink Floyd's greatest achievement to date.
Well, at least on paper. At the same time Roger was demoing The Wall, David Gilmour and Richard Wright both produced their own respective studio albums. I like both these albums. If you listen to Dave's, you can hear the origins for Run Like Hell and other ideas. I think Rick's Wet Dream is the most interesting because it broke down a misconception I had that he was completely useless as a writer at this time. In fact, at one time, I even made my own fan mix of The Wall, including a couple vocal songs from Wet Dream, to hear what it would have sounded like with Rick's contributions. If anyone wants me to do a video about my alternate playlist, let me know in the comments. I also like that these albums contained instrumentals, a staple of Pink Floyd's work that is oddly absent on The Wall. One issue that needs to be discussed is that the band was badly in debt due to back taxes and mismanagement of funds.
These band breakup stories, they always seem to revolve around money. Not the song, mind you, the concept of money. In fact, they'd have to impose their own exile on Main Street to France, where Dave and Rick had recorded their solo records. And so the pressing issue was that Pink Floyd had to make this record to make up for lost money.
And so, Roger finally presented the concept of The Wall, along with another piece he had worked on called The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, which would later become his first commercial solo album. The band found The Wall more intriguing and decided to start working on it, filling in musical spaces, or bricks, where needed. Bob Ezrin signed on as their producer.
Bob Ezrin had previously worked with Alice Cooper and Kiss, very theatrical acts, so he seemed like the natural choice to produce this record.
Let's hold off on some history for now, and to be serious for a second, one of the reasons I invited my History of Rock co-host is because I honestly don't know which way I'm going to go in rating this album, and so I think it's good to get some differing opinions, especially since, well, you guys aren't like super fans, right?
Well, I've only recently dove into their catalog. I gave my thoughts on Darkside in the review itself, which is still transcendent, endin'. Wish You Were Here and Animals were both good, though I think my expectations were very high after listening to Darkside. But I've actually been looking forward to finally sitting down and listening to The Wall in full.
Yeah, and before this review, I really only knew their greatest hits. Though because of this review, I did listen to Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, and I really enjoyed both of them. Actually, Dark Side of the Moon is probably one of my new favorite albums, and I'd love to listen to it again. As for The Wall, well, more thoughts on that later.
Okay, well, with all that said, let's spin this record, which does start off with a bang with In the Flesh.
Curiously, the album begins with a softer piece and the words "We Came In" spoken.
Then the heavy beat drops in, with a swirling organ echoing the rhythm section, one of the few short instrumental sections of the album. Already, this is an amazing sounding performance that hits you right in the face like, well, a brick. Supposedly, the organ was played by Fred Mandel, who played with Alice Cooper and later Queen, though this fact has been debated.
I wonder why the organ wasn't played by Rick Wright.
Yeah, I mean, he's only one of the most famous keyboardists in all of rock history.
Well, so already we're presented with a mystery, but we'll come back to that a little later.
Speaking of Queen, the song sounds similar to something Freddie Mercury might produce, with Roger taking the first lead vocal.
So you thought you might like to go to the show.
Lyrically, Roger introduces the concept and the protagonist, Pink. A nice callback to the question, which one's Pink? We're gonna find out what's behind those cold eyes by crawling our way through his disguise.
The song ends very theatrically, with a plane going down, representing the death of Pink's father, or rather Roger's father.
So far so good, so very good in fact. And with the cry of a newborn baby, we get the intro to The Thin Ice, a beautiful piano ballad with David Gilmour singing right before Roger Waters takes over.
If you should go skating.
Huh. Okay. I don't know that I was quite expecting that voice after hearing David sing a little more tenderly, but okay.
Alright, let's discuss this. I mentioned in the Animals review that while Roger's voice is great when used as part of an ensemble with Dave and Rick, it's a bit much if Roger's singing a majority of the material, and sometimes I just don't connect with whatever emotion he's trying to deliver. I've made no secret that I prefer Dave's voice, even Rick's gentler singing. While Roger's exaggerated delivery is great in the opening song, on the thin ice it's a little jarring, especially compared to Dave's vocal.
It's a testament that a lot of the best songs on the album are the ones that David sings.
Yeah, it's also a shame Rick doesn't sing on the album. His voice was actually a big part of Dark Side of the Moon.
Still, Roger manages to create tension when he sings the first part of Another Brick in the Wall, once again dealing with the autobiographical memory of his late father. Eric Fletcher Waters was killed in the Battle of Anzio when Roger was only 5 months old, and it clearly left a gaping hole in his heart, one that now has to be filled in by a brick in the wall.
Also credit to David for that delay-driven guitar, which would become very influential in the 80s.
Not to mention Rick Wright's synth textures. I feel there's a bit of a misconception about Rick not doing anything on this album. The rest of the band claims that Rick would just sit there in the studio, not contribute at all, despite demanding a producer's credit. By his own admission, he was feeling creatively bankrupt during The Wall, not aided by Roger asserting his creative authority, and the fact that Bob Ezrin sorta took a lot of the piano reins himself.
I'm to blame for not having anything, and he's to blame for not encouraging anything to come.
Oh, he wouldn't let us write. What? You know, I mean, that's just so stupid.
But according to engineer James Guthrie, Rick's contributions were notable when they worked just the two of them late in the evening. Unfortunately, the rest of the band wasn't there and assumed nothing got done. Regardless, it is difficult to figure out which keyboards are Rick's contributions and what's being played by the other band members, Bob Ezrin, or session players. Even in the All the Songs book, there's a lot of question marks in the personnel credits.
But for now, let's move on to the education section of the record with Happiest Days of Our Lives and Another Brick in the Wall. Part 2. Also, as a side comment, I really do love the way all these songs flow into each other, you know, particularly in this part of the album. It's why it's hard not to listen to both these songs together. The former is a critique on these insane teachers who would hurt the children in any way they could. And according to Roger, teachers in those days were absolutely strict and ruthless, committing horrendous psychological abuse.
I think a lot of the issues we deal with in adulthood stem from adolescent traumas and repressed childhood emotions, so it makes sense that this would be a brick in the wall that we build around ourselves.
I don't think I need to tell you that Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 was the biggest hit from this album, and Pink Floyd's only #1 single.
We don't need no education.
There's obvious elements of disco to be heard here, which held a monopoly on the charts at this time.
I hear somebody say burn, baby, burn. Disco inferno, burn, baby, burn. Hear the mother, hey, ear.
But unlike other rock artists who were just trying to cash in on the craze, Pink Floyd actually managed to make it their own. The second verse is sung by a children's choir, adding to the authenticity of the message.
And this is followed by a masterfully constructed guitar solo from David Gilmour, played on a Les Paul of all things.
Ezrin wanted me to play it direct inject, i.e. straight into the desk without amps, but I didn't think it had quite enough meat to it, and we added the guitar amp sound a bit to the DI sound.
Also, you gotta love Roger's screaming in character as the schoolteacher.
If you don't teach your meat, you can't have any pudding! How can you have any pudding if you don't teach your meat? I think that was a good one.
Crazy person.
And then we close side 1 with Mother. And I really love the acoustic strumming pattern on this one. I connect with it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Pigs on the Wing a little bit.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Mother, do you think I like this song? Mother, will they put me in the firing line?
And I like the way Roger and Dave sing together. Dave taking the role of Mother.
Yeah, because, that low, husky voice just screams, Mother!
When Roger does this live in his solo tours, he actually has one of his backup singers sing the part, which makes much more sense.
Ooh, baby. Ooh, baby. You'll always be baby to me.
What? I'm not crying. You're crying. Shut up, Mom.
Though one issue did arise in Nick Mason's drumming over the changing time signatures. So David called Jeff Porcaro of Toto, who played the drum beat flawlessly. Although shortly afterwards, the subject came up of whether Nick was even necessary. Yeah, Dave claims that Roger brought it up.
Is that so? Because I heard that Roger claimed that Dave suggested it.
Well, I guess we'll never know the real story for sure. But there was one band member who did get fired. Yeah, I've been avoiding this up until now, but Richard Wright, who had been there since the beginning, was effectively asked to leave the group following the album's sessions. To be fair, he was already thinking about quitting at the end of the Animals tour, but it really came to a head when the record company offered the band an extra point on the album to finish it by the end of the year, which given the financial position the band was in, was a no-brainer. With still a number of keyboard parts to work out, Roger sent manager Steve O'Rourke to ask Rick to work through his summer vacation to meet the deadline. Rick refused to give up time with his family, especially since he was going through a divorce and it was getting more and more difficult to see his children. So he said, and I quote, "Tell Roger to fuck off."
Oh, well, I'm sure that went over well.
I tried to get Rick to cooperate with me, and he declined. And so our ways parted.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, Roger got angry and gave an ultimatum. If Rick didn't leave, he would release The Wall as a solo album, leaving Pink Floyd to their own deaths. I think Nick Mason said it best in his book when he says, "This sounded like a madman with a gun pointed at his own head."
Rick was probably split between a feeling of, my God, I don't need any more of this, and the sheer unpleasantness of Roger trying to boot him out.
Wow. Sounds like shit was really hitting the fan while recording this album.
I know money, again, not the song, money itself, is always at the center of shit hitting the fan, but family has to come first, so I don't blame Rick one bit. Maybe it's because I'm a product of divorce. Maybe I should build a wall.
Well, Roger claims that Dave agreed with him over firing Rick.
Actually, Dave completely denies this, and honestly, I'm more inclined to believe him.
Jesus, can these two ever agree on anything?
Yeah, the day when Roger Waters and Dave Gilmour agree on something is the day when pigs fly. Oh. What's really weird about all this is that despite everyone calling Rick useless, he still wanted to finish the album and stay on for the tour, which Roger was totally fine with.
I wanted to actually finish the album and do the shows.
Yeah, and ironically, he was the only one of the four of them to make any money off of the tour.
Yeah, and the drama did not stop there. But why don't we move on and flip the record over?
Side 2 opens with the haunting acoustic number, Goodbye Blue Sky. And honestly, this song right here is actually one of my favorites on the album.
Yeah, me too. I'm a sucker for good harmonies, and the harmonies on Goodbye Blue Sky are hauntingly beautiful.
I can't imagine being born during the World War II bombings and growing up in the ruins of England. You want to talk about a brick in the wall, the PTSD from that alone would probably make someone want to build a wall.
And then we dive into the synth-driven empty spaces with that industrial rhythm that sounds like something you'd hear in a steel mill. While we're on the subject, I gotta say, this record sounds amazing.
It really does. The sound design is friggin' awesome.
Yeah, well, credit to engineer James Guthrie for really doing a number on this album. Empty Spaces replaced What Shall We Do Now due to time restrictions. And it's kind of a shame because I really love that tune and feel it not only fills in the spaces,
no pun intended,
of transitioning into adulthood and becoming a rock star, but Roger's angry voice really works on that tune.
But thankfully, we do get a kick-ass rocker written by David called Young Lust, chronicling a rock star getting himself a dirty woman. Dave's voice and guitar just kick ass on this tune.
Yeah, Dave!
Yeah, and also that's Dave playing bass on the song. Yeah, Roger wasn't spared in being replaced in the music either. In fact, Dave had huge arguments with Roger, feeling so much of the music was unsatisfactory, being a perfectionist himself. The only upshot to this is that Dave did at least get a few composition credits on the album, which Bob Ezrin was also keen on supporting.
Young Lust ends with a phone call to Pink's wife, who's having an affair, and transitions into...
Hello?
Hi, this is Running Gag calling. Why haven't you played Magical Beat yet? See, he keeps hanging up. And there's a man answering.
And this transitions into one of Pink's turns. This is pretty much where the breakdown happens. In one of my turns, Pink has invited a groupie over just when he's decided to go all Keith Moon on the hotel room. I like that both lyrically and musically this represents the pressure finally coming down on him. But then the next song, Don't Leave Me Now, gets a little too dark for me.
If I can be completely honest, this song is one of the biggest drawbacks of The Wall for me, and one of my least favorite vocals from Roger. I appreciate that he's reaching for that emotional peak, but the way he sings, is he trying to be funny?
Yeah, I know what you mean. This is honestly one of the weaker songs on the album. Don't Leave Me Now does create this feeling of encroaching darkness, and I love the guitar solo that finishes the song. It's almost like it was just building to that moment. But when I was re-listening to the song, I was wincing at some of the notes Roger was hitting, and honestly, it comes off like self-parody.
Yeah, I think it works a little bit better when you actually see him live. Roger is a very visual artist and it elevates the performance, but without the visual context on the record, I'm just not the biggest fan of his tone. At the very least, it is unique, and it does add something to the feeling. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if knowing the behind-the-scenes drama of Roger's ego trip actually affects some fans' enjoyment of the music.
That is a good point you bring up, and I will fully concede that a lot of my own criticisms do come down to personal tastes. At one time, I replaced the song on my own custom track listing with Rick's number from Wet Dream about his own failing marriage, Against the Odds, which actually works surprisingly well.
Each time we return to this crazy place, we break the promise made face to face.
Though the subtlety in his voice would have been a stark contrast to Roger's insanity that does lead to Another Brick in the Wall Part 3 and Goodbye Cruel World, where Pink finally fills in his wall and isolates himself from the world around him.
Goodbye, cruel world, goodbye.
So that's the first disc, and I would say, despite some hiccups, it's a solid record all by itself. If they had just ended it right at Goodbye Cruel World, I would have been satisfied.
Yeah, and I think that was Roger's original idea.
Originally my idea was to build the wall, and when it was finished, that was the end of the show.
But we still have a whole other disc to go through.
Can I come up now?
No, you're behind the wall, you have to stay there.
Yeah!
But this is a couch.
So nitpicky.
So specific.
Side 3 starts off with Hey You, another standout with the vocal shared between Dave and Roger, and it also uses the theme of Another Brick during the bridge. The song features another simple but effective solo by David.
In terms of the story, I believe Pink immediately regrets walling himself off and is attempting to make contact with the outside world. This is also heard in the haunting Is There Anybody Out There?
Which has a callback to Echoes with Dave's whale sounds.
I really love the classical guitar instrumental that follows. Michael Kamen was brought in to do the orchestration. That one chord progression even kinda has a bit of a James Bond feel for me.
That's also session guitarist Joe DeBlasi playing the classical guitar after David had trouble tracking it. Unfortunately, we're getting to one of my biggest issues with The Wall. I get kind of bored listening to one slow, morose tune after another. I think this is really where the myth of Pink Floyd producing slow, boring music comes from.
Seriously, can I get back on the couch now? My legs are getting cramped.
By themselves, they're fine. Nobody Home is a nice tongue-in-cheek number led by Bob Ezrin's piano. Roger has confirmed that this song definitely alludes to Syd Barrett. The line, "I got elastic bands keeping my shoes on," is a direct reference to Roger having witnessed Syd doing just that.
It also has that great lyric about having
13 channels of shit on the TV to choose from.
Apparently, David and Roger had a huge argument over Roger writing shitty songs and to come back with something better. Well, he came back with this gem, and Dave has even said it's one of his favorites on the album. But then it's followed up with another mellow tune, Vera. This is in reference to Vera Lynn's song, We Shall Meet Again, a staple of World War II.
And then we get Bring the Boys Back Home. Love the idea of the song, but it just feels wasted placed where it is, especially following Vera. I get that this is a very personal subject for Roger, but honestly, I wish the band had just used Roger's tribute to his father, When the Tigers Broke Free, left off of the original album. It was used in the film, so I'll discuss it more later on.
Yeah, I can actually see why they left this off the album. I mean, it's a great song by itself, but to me it's just a little too on the nose, you know?
See, I think they should have left it on the album, because I think it's emotional and one of Roger's best vocals. I mean, if you're going to include personal loss in your story, go for it. Instead, Bring the Boys Back Home feels like an unfinished afterthought.
Once again, this Jeff Porcaro on snare drum, which reminds me, we haven't heard from Nick in a while. It's starting to sound like a Roger Waters solo album.
But then, following these looping memories of trauma and intense knocking on the door, we finally get to Comfortably Numb to close out side 3.
Ah, yeah, I remember this used to get heavy airplay back in the day, and is still Pink Floyd's most well-known pieces.
Yeah, one of them. And when those drums come in, it really does feel like you've woken up.
The piece of music that became that I wrote when I was doing my first solo album.
Which he worked on with Roger's lyrics to create this masterpiece. Even if they still had unbending arguments over how to mix it.
In the concept of the story, Roger plays the doctor who's come in to snap Pink out of his funk so the show can go on. Dave responds with those gorgeous choruses, relating to Pink's youth when he caught deathly fever. The singing, along with Michael Kamen's orchestration, are just so beautiful.
When I was a child, I had a fever. My hands felt just like 2 balloons.
Lyrically, there's a lot of personal recollections being worked in here. The story of a doctor knocking on Pink's door saying, "Time to go!" is a direct reference to an incident with Syd, who was barely conscious before being shoved on stage. Even in my experience of touring, I can tell you that tour managers pumping their talent full of drugs is a very real thing that happens. But so much of the feeling, "my hands felt just like 2 balloons," do refer to incidents Roger felt both in the studio and on tour, where he felt like he too was going mad. But like so much of Pink Floyd's greatest work, how they turn this dark subject matter into something so musically uplifting is genius.
And David Gilmour's guitar solo, just perfect.
Yeah, it's definitely up there with Time or Shine On You Crazy Diamond. He never overplays, he builds the dynamics to a screaming climax, and the tone is out of this world. Musically, I feel it represents having been on this euphoric high and are now experiencing a painful come down from it and forced to return to reality. It's also such a welcome return to have the Pink Floyd we know and love all playing together. Nick's drum fills, Rick's swirling organ, and Roger's piercing bass.
Comfortably Numb saves this album, and maybe it's because all the darker tunes that came before it make you appreciate it even more.
That's true. We're now at the final disc, and it's gonna get weird.
I like weird.
I know.
Well, it starts off nicely with those Beach Boy-style harmonies led by an actual Beach Boy, Bruce Johnston.
Not to be confused with Brian Johnson.
With Dave singing lead. Then the audience welcomes the return of In the Flesh, but it turns out that Pink isn't well, he stayed back at the hotel.
So they sent themselves along as a surrogate band, and soon they're gonna find out where the fans really stand.
Yeah, we've pretty much come up to the point where Roger conceived the concept, he's walled himself off from the audience, and is finally ready to say what's really on his mind.
In the theater tonight, get him up against the wall.
Against the
That one looks Jewish, but that one's cool.
Whoa! Okay. I think we need to unpack this a little bit before Roger gets himself canceled.
I mean, if he isn't canceled already.
Okay, so it's obvious that Pink has turned into some sort of fascist dictator, and if you watch the film, it's obviously a parody of the Nazis, which I believe is later revealed to all be a hallucination brought on by the bad drugs the doctor makes him take. According to Roger, the idea is that when someone is in isolation for so long, they are stripped of their humanity and take it out on easy targets, in this case, minorities.
And it is meant to be obnoxious, I mean it is obnoxious, this is the end result of that much isolation and decay.
Perhaps this is a comment on where these tyrants come from.
You know, I actually have a different theory. I think it's more about Roger Waters' contempt for the audience and the music business at large. It's like he woke up one day and just said, I'm tired of touring, I'm tired of these fucking fans, so I'm gonna create controversy and get myself canceled before canceling is even a buzzword.
If you watch him doing this part in the live shows, he's practically insulting the audience, calling them pathetic and weak.
This is for all the weak people in the audience. Is there anyone here who's weak?
I mean, it's hilarious to watch, especially when he makes those dolphin noises. Makes me want to almost throw him a fish.
Yeah, and the audience still loves it, and that's probably commentary in and of itself.
I like to play me latest chart topper. It's called Me Fans Are Stupid Pigs.
I will say, if Roger did create this whole dictator section just to troll the audience, power to him, man. Thankfully, the music continues, and we get Dave's last musical contribution to the album, Run Like Hell. And this is another awesome rocker with an unforgettable guitar riff. This was actually the only parody song I did myself when I reacted to the Nostalgia Critics review. You could sing the lyrics as two different guys just arguing about something in a comment section.
You better put your bitch in and get your facts right. You're a butthurt douchebag and your ass is tight. Nice comeback, dick. You kiss your mother with that lip. I saw your mom last night and I watched her strip. Man, if I catch you in the street, I'll beat you all kinds of songs. I'm gonna send you back to mother with all your shots. You better run.
You know, I remember this getting heavy airplay on K-Rock, and I honestly thought it was an 80s song.
And we finally get a proper synth solo by Rick. See? He's still there contributing. Run Like Hell is obviously continuing the fascist dictator narrative, though on its own it might have more to do with paranoia. Perhaps drug-induced paranoia.
Unfortunately for me, this is kind of where my enjoyment of the album ends. Like, if they had ended following Nick's last drum hit and the crowd fading out, I would say that it's musically a satisfying ending. But we still have more to go. By the time we get to Waiting for the Worms, the fascist narrative is really wearing out its welcome on me. Hearing him sing about the final solution, showers and ovens, makes me a bit uncomfortable. I understand that it's satire, and I fully support Roger being able to sing about whatever he wants. I just wish I had a better idea of what that satire is. But this does come to a stop when Pink finally reveals his feelings. And that leads us to the climax of the story, The Trial, co-written by Bob Ezrin. I do like this song, but it's at this point it just doesn't feel like a Pink Floyd album anymore. Like the whole band collaborative element has just disintegrated to nothing.
This is the most musical theater-ish the album gets, and once again, Michael Kamen really outdoes himself with those lush orchestral arrangements. But whereas later live renditions benefited from having actual theater performers act out the different parts.
Good morning, world, Your Honor.
Tim Curry? In the Wall? How is that not a perfect fit?
The album version just has Roger singing everything, and we've already established that he doesn't have the most versatile voice.
Also, this song was clearly made for the stage show, which benefits from Gerald Scarf's animation and that exhilarating moment when the wall finally comes crashing down.
I thought, well, it would be quite a good thing to knock it down, brighten things up a bit.
Without the visual element, it's just kind of missing something.
And then finally we come to Outside the Wall, returning to the soft theme we heard at the start, and even beginning the phrase, "This is where we came in." I get that they wanted to end the album on a more positive note, and I do like that it represents some sort of circularity, that the wall will continue to be built and torn down. But musically, I would say this is the weakest ending of their entire 70s output. I have read Roger admit in an interview that he wasn't really sure how to end the wall, which makes sense. I don't think there really is an ending, though that didn't stop me from trying different ideas. Going back to Rick's solo album, I once used his track Pink Song at the end of my custom track listing, often interpreted as a tribute to Syd Barrett.
And I must go be on my way.
I could totally see a Rick composition like this, maybe with some updated lyrics from Roger, leaving the album with more emotional impact. But obviously, that's just wishful thinking. And that's The Wall, the album. As you can see, I have mixed feelings, and even now as I'm thinking about it, I'm torn between whether to give this album a goldfish or a spotted fish.
Really? Because personally, I'd give it a goldfish.
It's a great concept for an album. It does have a few misses, but there's more than enough hits. I'm a fan of weird, experimental music, and this album scratches that itch nicely.
Honestly, other than Dark Side of the Moon, I would call this Pink Floyd's best album.
I'd give it a spotted fish. I did like it, and I liked that it was theatrical in nature, and songs like Comfortably Numb and a few others would definitely join my playlists. It made me want to listen to more of Pink Floyd's stuff, which I did after listening to this album. But in comparison to Dark Side of the Moon, which I loved, I can't see myself spinning this on vinyl that often.
Well, good points, both of you. As a reminder, a goldfish I reserve for albums that should be bought on vinyl. The only reason I have this double LP on vinyl is because I was gifted it for Christmas, and thank you, by the way. But as I was listening to it on vinyl for the first time, I just don't get that same sense of awe that I get from listening to Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, or even Animals. I agree with Nick, the concept itself is deserving of a goldfish, especially on that first disc. Despite my criticisms of him, Roger Waters really does deserve praise for his vision and the enormous amount of work that went into this. Along with the contributions made by David Gilmour, solid performances by Nick Mason and Rick Wright, and great production by Bob Ezrin with James Guthrie behind the console. There are quite a few standout songs here. I think we all agree that Comfortably Numb is the essential track.
Yes, and Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is also a classic rocker.
Other standouts are Young Lust and Run Like Hell. You know, all the songs David Gilmour wrote.
And we agree that Goodbye Blue Sky is a true emotional standout.
And we really should include Hey You as well. All of these are must-listens. And even in the context of the full album, others are made stronger. When the three of us were spinning it together, it was a fun listen. And writing so many lyrical passages into this copy reminded me of how quotable it is. But there are some detracting factors here, at least for me. I don't find Roger Waters to be an engaging enough lead singer. There's a long stretch in the second disc of slow songs without much input from the band. And speaking of which, you can just hear there's not as much band chemistry happening. Yeah, there was tension on Animals, but it still ended up being a solid musical record. Personal taste aside, I just think it was too ambitious a project with too much financial pressure, too little time, and too much infighting to create a singular band vision. I should point out that many of these issues will see improvement on the upcoming live show, which I will talk about. But do I recommend you spend $50 to buy The Wall on vinyl? I have to say no. So, at the risk of disagreeing with a lot of fans, I do have to give Pink Floyd's The Wall a spotted fish.
Kill the monster!
And again, I still recommend you listen to the album. How you choose to do so is entirely up to you.
Or you could watch a live performance, which fortunately there are plenty of.
And who knows, maybe they'll even bring it to Broadway one day. I mean, if David and Roger could ever stop their squabbling.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be talking about the live show next, because there's still so much to talk about with this project. For now, if you excuse me, I'm going to create a wall of my own around my door so the two of you never barge into my apartment again.
He does know about the portal behind the couch, right?
Let's not tell him.
Good idea.
Isn't this where